On this week's Eastern Conference edition of Locked On NHL, it is our Atlantic Division preview show. Will any new blood finally make the postseason?
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On NHL, your team every day, where we have local experts on the biggest stories 5 days a week. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. You can also follow all of our great hosts all across the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me at Locked On Ottawa Senators, and it is the Battle of Ontario edition. With me from Locked On Maple Leafs, it's Mike DiStefano. Today is Wednesday, September 25th, and Mikey, 0-2 against the Sens. Is it time to panic yet in Leafland?
That's an unserious question, Ross. I know why you're asking it, and I appreciate the humor. I'm not sure why anyone thought that was a question that Craig Berube was going to entertain yesterday after the game. But hey, congratulations! You know, the Ottawa Senators 2-0 in the preseason. I mean, hang the banner. Let's hang the banner up there, pal.
Let's go. Hey, this is the year, though, where at least somebody's got to make it interesting, right? Because we're talking about off the top, like, will there be new blood? If you look at the active postseason streaks right now, the top two are in the Atlantic Division. The Boston Bruins, Toronto Maple Leafs have each made the playoffs in the last 8 seasons. Tampa Bay's made the playoffs in the last 7 seasons. And the Florida Panthers have made the playoffs in the last 5 seasons. It really feels like such a gap between the top and bottom, whereas you flip it, the Sabres have gone 13 years without making the playoffs. Detroit's at 8 and Ottawa's at 7. Like, this is so far apart, but is this the year it gets closer?
I think it is, Ross. I really do. I mean, for years it's been a top 4, bottom 4 situation. But you know what's crazy is I don't think it's because the teams at the top are falling off per se. Like maybe a little bit, a smidgen for some of those groups, but I just think that the bottom 4 teams are just, you know, they finally, after years of tanking and getting top 10 picks, you know, those guys are starting to come to fruition. You know, you got Buffalo, Detroit, your Ottawa Senators, who, you know, what was it, 2020? They had 2 picks in the top 5. You know, they ended up grabbing Timmy Stu and then Jake Sanderson. I think both those guys are ready to kind of erupt this season. And that's to go along with the other young group that they got there, along with now Linus Ullmark, who's, you know, hopefully going to backstop them to some victories. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting battle in the Atlantic. It's going to be difficult. Everyone's going to be trying to rip points off each other. And I think this is the year, to answer the question, that we do finally see a little bit of change. One team that has been a staple in the playoffs for years will not be. And then one of those, you know, 3-4 teams that have consistently been, oh, this is our year, hasn't been. Maybe this is finally the year it happens.
Maybe this is the year. And even Montreal, I mean, as two
I think they're in the same boat as Ottawa, Detroit, and Buffalo. I think they're in the same boat. Like, I really, really do, man. Like, that's a team.
They don't have to stay healthy, man.
But if they can stay healthy, that's their issue.
And they've got question marks in the top 6. Like the guys that they're counting on, Laine coming off only playing a handful of games, and Kirby Dach played 2 games last year. Like that could make or break whether they're in the mix or a lottery 1, 2, 3 pick team.
That goes back to health. Like it's just if they're not healthy, then it's, you know, the tough situation. But
it's easier to question health when it's guys who just last year couldn't get through much of the season.
Sure, and that's fair. You can make that argument. But if we're assuming everyone's healthy, I think they're right up there with, you know, the rest of the teams. I mean, you could say the same thing if Tim Stützle and Jake Sanderson get hurt, or Tim Stützle and, you know, Brady Tkachuk get hurt.
Well, right, but Brady's played like 250 of the last 251 games, right? Like there's a long-standing Iron Man kind of capability guys, and I think the more biggest question for Ottawa is, can Josh Norris stay healthy after he's been dealing with injury issues? So that's certainly a fair one. Now, can Shane Pinto step up? I think so, but that's obviously something that will be seen. We're jumping around a little early to the playoff, the playoff hopefuls, but it'd be ridiculous to start a Atlantic Division pod without tipping our cap to the Stanley Cup champion. So the Florida Panthers, let's start with them. I mean, what is expectations? Repeat or bust?
I would imagine, yeah. Like in Florida, yeah, of course it's always going to be repeat or bust. If you're the defending Cup champs, you can't just say, yeah, we won last year. Like, that's good enough. No, it's not good enough. I mean, you've got to go and try and defend your crown, defend your title. 100%. That's a team that, will be and should be expected to compete for a Stanley Cup once again. I think that it's a group that knows how to win a championship. And, they didn't lose a whole lot. They were able to retain no, they lost Montour. They were able to retain Reinhart. So, I think that it's a squad that has pretty much a similar nucleus returning. And I don't see any way how they're the team that falls out of it and doesn't make the playoffs. I still think that this is a Cup contending team for sure.
Their decor does worry me a little bit. They lost a lot of their depth that went all over. But again, and I guess to follow up on that too, like Bobrovsky was outrageously talented last year, but he's not getting any younger, and he's just had 2 long playoff runs. Like, it's one thing for Vasilevsky to do it at 27 years old, but Bobrovsky at 35, 36 is a little bit different. They're going to have to rely on getting some secondary goaltending from Spencer Knight. That's a huge question for the Florida Panthers. Anthony Stolarz was one of the best backup goalies in the league. Him and Laurent Brossoit won 2 in Jennings Trophy for the teams there as well. Like, he signs in Toronto. Spencer Knight was making $4.5 million in the minors. We know he's dealt with some issues in the player department of health or player assistance program. Pardon me. And I think that if he hits his potential, it could be as seamless of a handoff as Timmy Thomas handing the torch to Tuukka Rask, or, in New York where Shesterkin gets the torch from Henrik Lundqvist, but it could also be far from it as well.
Yeah, and I think it's gonna be a big part of it, but I no reason to believe that Bob's won't be as good. And defensively, didn't they sign Nate Schmidt for like pennies on the dollar?
Well, he got bought out, so he's making money in Winnipeg. And then who's the head coach in Florida? Paul Maurice. A lot of history there with the Jets.
Yeah, so I mean, they replace. He's not as good as Brandon Montour, obviously, but
he's as good as OEL.
Some stuff as good as OEL. There you go. That's the replacement there that they were able to find. So yeah, I think that it's a really good team. Ultimately, I mean, they just won the Stanley Cup, so I have high expectations again for the Florida Panthers this season.
Not that it's like a breakout candidate, because he kind of did last year, but like Gustav Forsling is so damn good at hockey.
So good. So
good at hockey. So credit to the Florida Panthers for just building a team where now it was one of those, like, they had the destination for weather and taxes, but it still wasn't a place people wanted to play. But now
it's
the best show in town. It feels like the Miami Heat don't really have a competitive team. The Miami Dolphins, and then I think they might be the biggest show in town. Am I missing? No, the baseball team stinks too.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the Dolphins, when they're rolling, are okay, but for sure, I think that right now, I mean, this is the only championship caliber team down in South Beach. So absolutely.
That's awesome. I think that we're going to see the Florida Panthers come out swinging. I don't think there's going to be a cup hangover with this team. They're built they've got too much FU in their game to be a team that starts slow, I think.
I forgot they also picked up Adam Boqvist, which is like such a redemption project that feels like it's going to work. Like they've hit it out of the park with these redemption projects, whether it's Carter Verhaeghe, Sam Bennett, Evan Rodriguez. Like, doesn't Adam Boqvist seem like he's going to put it together this year? And, not that he's going to completely replace Brandon Montour, but, when it comes to being a puck-moving defenseman who can add a little bit of that juice in the back end, doesn't feel like Boqvist is in for, that big step of a year.
Yeah, I mean, he's former first-round pick, top 10 pick, and has played for Chicago and Columbus. So structurally, a little bit different now, heading down to South Florida, and kind of a cool story, kind of like we saw in St. Louis with the Joseph brothers. he's actually joining his brother Jesper Bokvist, who signed with the Florida Panthers. So kind of a cool reunion there for them. And watch out for Anton Lundell to take a huge step forward this year. Another very talented centerman that gets overshadowed having Barkov and Bennett as your top two, but he's going to be a 50-point guy, I think, this year for the Florida Panthers. All right, on the other side, we'll get to the other playoff always teams, the Boston Bruins, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and in the third segment, Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa. It's the third year where we say which one of those three teams. It may as well be a turtle race, how slow that it's been developing, but those three teams all hoping that playoffs could be on the horizon. And you mentioned, we already kind of talked about Montreal a little bit, a free spot on the bingo card as they await Ivan Demidov to come over from the KHL. But they also have some interesting young players that could take a next step. That's all coming up. You're listening to Locked On NHL. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. And at the NFL season, we've got a big return on FanDuel. When you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you can go check it out with the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bet. So it makes it so easy to go to FanDuel and see everything you need. You can also check out futures. You know we love some Ottawa Senators and NHL futures on this show. Mikey, I've been banging the drum. Jake Sanderson for Norris. I know it sounds wild, but get this. Twice as long odds as Thomas Chabot, plus 12,000 for Jake Sanderson for the Norris. So I put a little $5 on it, just having some fun over at FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Go visit them at FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, welcome back. Locked On NHL, your team every day. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network. That's Mike DiStefano. You can follow him on Twitter at Mikey_Canuck. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find me over at Locked On Ottawa Senators. We are here breaking down the Atlantic Division. And yeah, awesome to see the Florida Panthers win the Cup. But it does kind of stay in South Florida, at least in terms of the Atlantic Division. I know a couple teams in between there in Colorado and Vegas, but the last time the Cup was in the Atlantic Division, otherwise, it was on the west coast of Florida in Tampa. No Steven Stamkos, Victor Hedman, the new captain in town. No surprise there. What's your outlook on the Lightning season?
I mean, I think the Lightning are always going to be a good team. Like, they still have a good core there. Like, yes, they're losing Steven Stamkos, which is massive, but they replace an aging Stamkos with Jake Gensel. And I think that could be, I think Gensel could give you just as much as Stamkos could have at that point. They bring in a Cam Atkinson, defensively, they swap out who was the young defenseman there that they trade to Nashville?
They got JJ Moser.
Sorry, they got Moser for Sergachev. That's it, Sergachev. They trade out Sergachev, but they bring back Ryan McDonough, which I think is going to be a massive boost to this team defensively. Their numbers last year in terms of the underlying numbers defensively, not great. They haven't been the last couple of years since they moved on from McDonough, but they bring him back into the fold, and I think that it's going to work out well. I actually believe that the Tampa Bay Lightning going to have a much stronger year this season than they had last year. A full year of Andrei Vasilevskiy will obviously help, and I think there's been some Vasilevskiy slander being thrown around recently. It seems like people are forgetting how good this guy actually is and was, and I saw a ranking that had him fifth as the fifth best goalie in the NHL, which is just absurd to me.
It's him and Shesterkin. I don't think that there's anybody else even in the mix for the top two.
No, I agree. I'm with you on that.
Maybe Hellebuck
could say hello, obviously, but
Staros had a step back. But now we're talking top five. Top five is still elite, but nobody's got the body of work that Vasilevskiy has.
No, and I think that he's going to come in and show people, hey, I'm still here. I'm only 31 years old, guys. So I'm still very much capable of being an elite goaltender, and I'm going to show you all up this year. I think Tampa's going to be in for a pretty strong season. I'm a big believer in the Bolts this year.
Despite no Steven Stamkos, hey?
Yeah. I mean, they brought in Jake Gensel. I think Gensel could offer just as much offense as Steven Stamkos could.
And Stamkos had gotten to a point in his career the last 2 seasons where the defensive inefficiencies were starting to become pronounced. Still has that classic one-timer and can still score in a number of different ways, but it's an interesting trade-off. And I'm also curious to see how JJ Moser looks there, because I think he's got some high upside for a young guy. I know he was drafted as an overager, like he wasn't 18 at the draft, but he stepped right in to the National Hockey League. He just got his money. He got $3.375 million on a 2-year contract there. And he's a very solid player. I think that he's going to be one of those guys where we say like, hey, like they didn't lose much on Sergachev, just 1-for-1. And then you throw in, they got a decent prospect in Connor Geekie, a 2nd-round pick and a 7th. I think that's going to look really good for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Yeah, I wouldn't be counting them out to make the playoffs again. I think they're a team that will be in the hunt this season in Tampa Bay. All right, the Boston Bruins. We first off have to say Jeremy Swayman at the time of this recording is still unsigned. He's really the only RFA notably that's unsigned after Cole Perfetti agreed to contract 2 days ago with the Winnipeg Jets. He says he doesn't want to mess up the goalie market for others. You got to appreciate that. But at some point, who's going to bend? Because from my vantage point, especially being in Ottawa, why'd they trade Linus Ullmark before getting a deal done with Swayman?
Yeah, it was obviously a miscalculated decision.
They took the leverage and said, here you go.
Yeah, it made no sense. It really made no sense. And that was the big talking point. I remember when the trade was made was, I'm surprised they did that without getting a deal done with Swayman. But everyone assumed that something was going to get done. And look, I still believe they will figure it out. I'd be surprised if, these two don't come to some sort of agreement by the start of the season. I think that Swayman will be there, day one and be ready to go for game number 1. But it definitely is going to cost them more money than it would have if they didn't trade away Ullmark. I firmly believe that. So it's an interesting situation. I'm hearing like someone said like he's asking for Carey Price money, which is insane. Absolutely insane.
Well, there's 2 big goalies right now that are about to change the game for what goalies are getting paid. Swayman right now, but as an RFA with less rights. After next year, Igor Shesterkin's an unrestricted free agent.
Okay, but Shesterkin makes sense for Carey Price money. Like what he's been able to do throughout his career. There's a body of work. He's been a starter. He's brought his team deep into postseasons. Swayman hasn't done any of that. So what in what world is he in that same conversation to be making double digits? Like he's never even played 60 games in a season. Like I don't understand if that is the case. Again, we don't know, and I don't want to get on Sweeney's bad side.
Yeah, you don't want Sweeney to call you out next week?
No, I don't want him to start, misnaming this podcast.
The Locked Off podcast?
Yeah, something like that. So I don't need to get on his bad side, but they got to figure it out because he's clearly the backbone. I mean, the goaltending and defense is what keeps that team rolling each and every year. So I feel far more confident in that group if they get something done with Swayman than obviously I do in Korpisalo. But I don't know how much I believe that this Boston team is going to be as good as they were. Like, I know, yes, you've got Swayman, whatever. They got the goaltending figured out, but it's a bit of an aging group and an aging core. And I know they brought in Elias Lindholm. They're hoping he can be a top center for them, but I don't know. Something just tells me that one of those teams has to fall out for one of those other teams to bump in. Could be the Bruins. This could be the year.
I called that 2 years ago, and they set the all-time record for most points in a season. So I learned my lesson. I learned my lesson.
But I'm gonna call it every year until it happens. Hey, Ross, you're never wrong. You're just a little early sometimes.
Yeah, you don't lose till you leave the table. Hey, that's what they say in Vegas. You never lose till you leave the table.
That's right. That's right, buddy. You haven't lost on a stock until you sell it, right?
Speaking of Vegas, speaking of having some fun, our friends over at FanDuel have put out the odds of who the Boston Bruins goalie is going to be for Game 1 of the regular season. Let's play Guess That Line, Mikey. Do you think it's more likely that it's Swayman or Korpisalo? Or Brandon Bussi?
The line? What's the line?
We got a line for it.
I'm going to guess Swayman has to be favored still, no?
Do you think it's a big favorite?
No, I don't think so. Like, I think it's probably like minus 140 or something like that.
Minus 160 that Jeremy Swayman starts Game 1. If you think it's Korpisalo, plus 125. Not that much of a long shot, though. So we'll see. If you want to get wild, Brandon Bussey at plus 6,000 for him starting game 1 of the regular season. So that's the Boston Bruins. And by the way, Nikita Zadorov is like the most Boston Bruins player they could have gotten.
Yeah.
He is going to fit in so well there. It's just about, can Charlie Coyle be a number 1 center? Can he take his game to another level? Do they have the depth at center? Is Morgan Geekie the type of guy that can be a 2C? Or is this Matthew Poitras, going to be able to step in after he got an extended look as an 18-year-old last season? So that's the Boston Bruins, and now we get to the Toronto Maple Leafs. But not before a quick word. We'll be right back. You're listening to Locked On NHL, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform because you don't have to search, you match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed because there's over 350 million global monthly visitors. That's according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging. You can connect with your candidates faster. And not only faster, but better. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Welcome back, Locked On NHL, your team every day. That's Mike DiStefano from Locked On Maple Leafs. I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Ottawa Senators. A reminder that you can find Locked On everywhere you get podcasts, free and available on YouTube as we continue this Atlantic Division preview show where we move to your Toronto Maple Leafs, who aren't panicked after 2 preseason losses to the Ottawa Senators. But new coach in Craig Berube, new backup goalie in Anthony Stolarz, new captain in Austin Matthews. What's the vibe in Leafs land?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the year, a lot of people are kind of just going to sit back and wait and see what happens. It's the defense got also a nice little overhaul, bringing in Chris Tanev, bringing in Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Yanni Hakanpää is around. We'll see if he's healthy enough to play. And then what can you get out of the guys who were held over as well? I think it's going to be an interesting season. Max Pacioretty's in tow now. He's looked pretty good.
2 goals his first preseason game.
Yep, and it looks like he's kind of starting to find and gel and find a spot as that third line left winger next to John Tavares. So it's going to be an interesting season. They're trying to experiment by kicking Nylander in the middle, see if they can go Matthews, Nylander, Tavares as kind of your 1-2-3-C and just kind of lengthen the lineup a little bit. I like the idea if it works. I don't think it's necessarily something you're going to have to force, but it sounds like they're going to give it a legitimate go. But I'm curious to see what this all looks like under Craig Berube. It's been 5 years where it's been Sheldon Keefe. It's been a Sheldon Keefe camp. It's been Sheldon Keefe coach team, Sheldon Keefe systems, and it's all different now. It's just a different vibe. So I'm excited to see how the season pans out. I think they're going to be a playoff team. There's no doubt in my mind that they're going to make the playoffs. It's always what happens in April. That's always what Maple Leaf fans, care about, and it's almost apathetic until April, until go time to see exactly what group shows up. For the entirety of this core's career, basically, outside of one series. Outside of one series, it's been pretty well no-shows come playoff time. But hey, maybe Craig Berube, Chief, as they call him, can get these soldiers ready to go.
It's definitely the type of coach they needed, right? They needed kind of the hard ass, if you will, where it's a guy who comes in. He's not going to be putting players who make 10 million plus on pedestals. Everybody's got to work hard. He's got that reputation. And I think that
accountability, really
the biggest thing is Chris Tanev for me. Like, I think that he's just going to set the tone of what accountability is, being like, if I'm eating pucks back there, I expect you forwards to get back and help me out in the defensive zone, and just the respect that he has. Does he have a letter? Are they giving him a letter this year?
No letter. That's
surprising. Well, I guess they've got a bit of a packed crowd. Don't they have like 5 letters?
Yeah, I mean, I'm
pretty
San
Jose has like 8.
Well,
San
I
Jose put
mean,
out 1 million, half the team.
we'll see what ends up happening come opening night. But I know the Leafs, that like Matthews is a full-time captain. Tavares is going to be a full-time A. And then Marner and Riley are going to rotate home and away when it comes to the other A.
All right.
Well, that's what they did last year, except it was Matthews and Marner. Now it's going to be Riley and Marner.
Is it almost frustrating though for you that like not that it doesn't matter, but really like this team's going to make the playoffs? Ottawa was in that spot in like the mid 2000s where you're just like, you've had all these bad experiences when you get to the playoffs that you almost dread the regular season because you're like, I'm being fooled again. This year's different.
Oh yeah. Every year. And you start to think, okay, they're doing things that make you feel like it's going to be different. And then come April, it's not. It's the same. Yeah. So, but different coach. So we'll see if we can get a different ending. If not, this is the summer for overhaul. I mean, Marner and Tavares both are going into contract years. They do not have an extension in place. There could be at some point throughout the season, but as of now, that's not the case. And if the season doesn't go well and they lose out in the first round and those guys are no show again, I mean, the core four will be no more. That I can surely tell you.
Core four will be no more. My goodness, we got a poet on our hands here. I got a little poetry for you too. 8 years straight, the Leafs have made the playoffs. Ottawa has missed the playoffs in 7 straight years. In the Matthews-Marner era, the Senators have more playoff wins than the Leafs, 2-1. And the fact that one of those 2 wins was against the Boston Bruins is just the cherry on top.
The Sens or Erik Karlsson has 2 wins, Hunters.
I mean, you could put Bobby Ryan with 5-game winners that postseason right in the mix. That team was actually pretty decent. If you look at the roster, Mark Stone, all those guys that moved on, Mike Hoffman was elite, but it's a long time ago. But still 2 series versus 1. It's the way she goes.
Yeah, well, how many cups does Ottawa have in their lifetime?
Ottawa has a lot. This Senators franchise does not, but if you ever see the Stanley Cup, I know it's always in Toronto at the Hall of Fame. Go by and look at the top ring. It actually says Ottawa 11 times. It says Ottawa. And the cup was actually made in Ottawa. It was commissioned by England for Ottawa to build. So it's coming home, maybe, this year, one day. There's also a great story just quickly in the canal where they were celebrating on the canal in boats, and it fell in. And somebody had to dive into the most disgusting water you've ever seen to go save the Stanley Cup. I think that was in 1917.
Classic. That's why the league doesn't let them win anymore.
Exactly. We party too hard. Ottawa's got that reputation as a very party-heavy city, so I understand why that's the case.
Should we get to Ottawa? Is Ottawa
sure, man. You
list?
Tell me your outsider's perspective going into this season, because for me, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid again. I'm drinking it.
Yeah, look, here's the thing. Ottawa, it's been a couple of years now where it's like they gotta take that next step, and they have not yet done it. They thought they had figured out the goalie situation last year with Korpisalo. Clearly was not the case. Did they do it again here with Ullmark? I think Ullmark's a better goalie than Korpisalo. Obviously, that's why the Senators made the trade. But the problem is, look, Ullmark was terrible in Buffalo because the system in front of him didn't play well. He was great in Boston because the system in front of him was off.
He was good in Buffalo. Come on. Give me a break. He's got a .915. I would kill for a .915 save percentage in Ottawa.
What was his goals against?
Oh, I don't look at the goals against. When you're on a bad team, to me, your save percentage is all that matters.
Sure. One season of .915. What was it before that?
No, he had a few. He surprisingly good. So he came in the league 2015-16. His first year with the Sabres. So these are his Sabre save percentages. 20 games, .913. 37 games, .905. 34 games, .915. 20 games, .917.
So, I mean, firstly, small sample size. Second of all, the guy just saw a lot of pucks. That's what that tells me. Saw a lot of pucks.
278 goals against in 117 career games.
Saying, like, Freddie Anderson had like a .915, .918 save percentage all the time. Freddie Anderson wasn't a good goalie.
If Freddie Anderson was the Senators goalie, I would have much more confidence than I did with Joonas Korpisalo. I promise you that.
Which is
fair.
Korpi
had an .890 last year.
My point is,
they both did.
Ullmark does not have the support in front of him that he had in Boston. Has nothing to do with Buffalo. It was the Boston thing that I was getting at. So we'll see how good he is in front of that Senators defense. And if they can play some defense in front of him. I like the pickup of Nick Jensen. I think that, balances out the lineup a little bit. And we'll see if the rest of the group can take that next step that they have to. The Sandersons up front, you've obviously, we talked about Pinto, Norris, Stützle. Can he bounce back and score some more goals this year? That's going to be the real kind of test, I guess. Like, can really Greg turn into an everyday NHLer this season and be good? Like, that's where it's going to come from. This team is, can they take that next step, and ultimately can they win games in October and November? Because that's been their Achilles heel for years now, is they get off to such a slow start, they dig themselves such a big hole, they can't crawl out of it. Travis Green's going to have to make sure that he gets those boys ready to go for you come opening night, or else it could be a long season again if they get off to another slow start.
And it's go time. I think the core has been here long enough that it's all like, we don't have a fun jingle like you've got for the Leafs, but it's very similar feeling around Ottawa that if they don't make a big push this year, it's like, look, we've changed everything else except for the big core of this team. It might be time to dip in. But I will say the team, to me, gets a bit of a mulligan last year with the ownership change. The amount of investment that's gone into this team, whether it's redoing the workout facilities, the medical facilities, the gym, all those things that you don't have a salary cap for. And we know in Montreal and Toronto, they print money and they're able to have the best in class mantra for everything. And I think that Michael Andlauer is a very popular figure in Ottawa. They just agreed to a deal with the NCC, which should build a downtown arena within the next 5 to 7 years. We'll see. I'm always saying I'll get excited when a shovel goes in the ground. Until then, call me a skeptic that anything will ever get built in Ottawa. But that would obviously just kind of reinvent kind of how the rest of the league sees Ottawa. These guys get off a plane and they go into cornfields in the suburbs, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, here's the rink, here's the hotel. So to attract free agents, that sort of thing, I think it'll go a long way. But they also need to have better on-ice performance. And what they did was go out and get good vets to be able to insulate. They moved on from guys like Mathieu Joseph, Mark Kaslick, and Parker Kelly, and replaced them with 2 Stanley Cup champions in Michael Amadio and David Perron. And then now you're getting a look at Noah Gregor, who I think is a Parker Kelly fourth-line guy, not a huge deal. And on the back end, I know around the league, everyone's like, wow, they got fleeced for Jacob Chychrun. And I understand that. Jacob Chychrun's got great offensive upside, but they had too much of the same type of defenseman. With Chabot, Sanderson, Chychrun, and even Brandstrom last year, they moved on from. All 4 left shot defensemen, offensive minded. Only Sanderson knows even how to spell defense. So now at least the right side, you've got Jensen and Zub, 2 guys who are solid defensively, who won't bring a whole lot of offense, but this is hopefully going to kind of unlock Thomas Chabot.
Yeah, I didn't hate the move as much as most. I thought they gave up a lot, obviously, or didn't get. It was
a sunk cost, different management.
But ultimately, I think they needed to make that trade. And I think they're better off for it.
So what Sens fans are saying, we'll move on to Buffalo and Detroit quickly after that, but they're saying the team isn't more talented, but it's better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think I understand where
it fits.
You're coming from there.
Things fit a little bit better. They've been trying to find a fit in Buffalo.
It's different. Like it's
different.
It's just different. You know, like when Florida, they made that trade, they sent out 115-point Jonathan Huberdeau and brought back Matthew Tkachuk. It wasn't necessarily Tkachuk was the better player, but he was a different player and might make things work a little bit better. And, well, 2 years later, they win a Stanley Cup. I would pump the brakes on the Stanley Cup talk here, Rossi, but different.
I was just Googling. I want to get a replica ring.
Yeah, well, good luck.
Buffalo or Detroit? Who are you power ranking higher going into this season?
Who do you think I'm power ranking higher?
I think you're taking Detroit.
Buffalo.
Nice. I've taken Buffalo too, but I think the favorite, if we're going to put a line on it, I'm sure Detroit has a higher point total than Buffalo.
Probably. I would think they would. But
I hate Detroit's goaltending. What
goaltending?
Well, they've got 5 guys who might be able to play.
Yeah, if you got 5, you got none, brother.
Yeah, it's like a quarterback. You got 2, you don't have 1.
Exactly. Like, who are you going to play? Husso? Talbot?
Jack Campbell?
Like, Jack Campbell? You going to play
Sebastian Casa?
Right? Like, there's just so many guys out there that
Cam Talbot's probably the starter, though, day one.
It'll probably be Talbot Husso, I would imagine. Like, is Husso healthy? I don't even know if he's healthy right now,
I
but
don't
like
know.
that guy's making $3.5 million. Like,
4.5, dude.
God, jeez, Louise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Whereas Buffalo found their goalie last year with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen.
stud.
Stud.
Yeah, he's a good goalie. You know, you've got Matthias
Levi will
Samuelsson getting
eventually be
healthy.
there too, I think.
He will for sure. Absolutely, he will. But Samuelsson will be healthy and in the top 4. You got this Ryan Johnson kid who I like as well.
Yep.
Obviously, Rasmus.
Zach Benson, my
Yeah,
guy. I watched
Rasmus
him with the
Dahlin.
Winnipeg Ice. That guy is outrageously talented. I could see him putting up 60 points this year.
Oh, Benson, Peterka, Alex Tuck, Tage Thompson. Like, they've got lots of talent on that Sabres roster. It was a step back year for that Sabres squad last year. But, they kind of did a similar thing to Toronto where they're like, all right, let's go out. It was a bit of a country club this past season. Let's go out and get ourselves, a bit of a grizzled vet of a coach. And then they brought back Lindy Ruff, who was the head coach of the team the last time that they were in the playoffs. So they're hoping that that'll work out in their favor. I forgot they brought in Ryan McLeod too. It was a weird trade, one that I believe they lost on, but they lost. I think they'll lose on it long term, but short term, I think Ryan McLeod gives them what they need in like a bona fide third line center who's very responsible in his own end, and that should help.
Fly.
Yeah, that should help them this season at least. More so than Savoy probably would have. So
yeah.
I kind of like what Buffalo was able to do. They didn't do a lot, but I think that last year you had a lot of players kind of not necessarily
moving on from Skinner's big, right? Moving on from Skinner just kind of changes something that's been a constant through the last number of years.
I just feel like they weren't too active in free agency. They didn't make any big additions. Like everything that they did, was more so they're banking on internal improvement. They're banking on Peterka taking a step. They're banking on Tage Thompson returning to a 40-goal form. They're banking on Dylan Cousins returning to, being a 60-point guy, looking like a number 2 center. They're banking on Jack Quinn to break out. They're banking on Zach Benz. Like, they're just banking on a lot of internal improvements. And I kind of like the bets that they're making here because I like the roster. Detroit, like, they've got a lot of solidified NHLers, but what's their identity? Like, it's a weird team. It's just a mismatch of players. I don't really know what Stevie Y's doing over there. I gotta be completely honest with you. It's a wild for the last couple of years. It's been a really weird situation. What he's done in free agency, what he's done in the trade market. It's like, what are you trying to do here?
The decor does not impress me at all.
No, not one bit. And again, no defense, no goalie, no chance.
Yeah. They do have some high-flying forwards, man. I'm expecting Lucas Raymond to take another step forward after his contract extension, and Patty Kane still showtime, and they're going to score, man. DeBrincat can pop him in a hurry. Remember, he got off to such a hot start to start last season. So
your boy. They're
going to be interesting to watch, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I mean, hey, they might score 3-4 goals a game, but they're going to get scored on 4 or 5 more. So
official prediction: who from the Atlantic Division makes the playoffs this year?
All right, I've got Florida, I've got Tampa, I've got Toronto. That's my 1, 2, 3. I still think that we see, those 3 finish 1, 2, 3, and then I think 1, 2 teams make it from the Atlantic when it comes to the wild card. I think they scoop up both the wild card spots. I think it's going to be your Ottawa Senators. I think they do it. I think they make the playoffs. Hopefully it would be awesome if we get a Battle of Ontario.
Oh, buddy.
And I think the Buffalo Sabres make the playoffs. I really do. I think the Sabres. I'm calling the shot. I think Buffalo ends the streak as well. So those are the 5 teams in the Atlantic I have making it through. And Boston is the squad that's fallen out of it.
I love it. Okay, I'm just going to go boring. I'm going to say the 4 teams that made it last year are going to make it again because I've said the Sens are going to make the playoffs back-to-back years. I've been wrong both times. So I'm doing everything I can. I'm rearranging my desk. I'm just trying to change the feng shui around it. So officially, I'm on record as saying the 4 teams that made it last year, Boston, Tampa, Toronto, and Florida, will make the playoffs once again. Let us know in the comments what you think the Atlantic Division will look like at the end of this season. And a reminder, for more on each individual team, type in Locked On Leafs, Locked On Senators, Locked On Lightning, and so on and so forth through the entirety of the division. We'll be back tomorrow with power rankings. For today, we say goodbye. For Mike DiStefano, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been another edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Your team every day.